Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to everyone for being here today and to the DEQ team for getting us set up for success this morning. I'm Emily Domenech. I'm the Vice Chair of the State Air Pollution Control Board. And in the absence of the chair, I am of a sitting chair. I'm calling this meeting to order. And at this time, I'd like to ask our board members, since we have so many new faces, to introduce themselves. So maybe we'll start on the end on my left and work our way down, if that's okay.
Yep. Hi, I'm Sharon Shuttler, and I'm a new member.
Avi Garbo, also a new member.
I am Kimberly Beamer.
Kale Jaffe.
Bill Shobe.
Mike Goldman, Director of DEQ.
David Harrington at the Office of the Attorney General.
But before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that this is a regular business meeting of the board, and conduct that interferes with the orderly and efficient meeting or interferes with the rights of others to speak to the board is prohibited. So now we can go ahead and proceed with the agenda for today. Let's see, agenda item number 2 is to review and approve the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Okay, a second?
You got the second.
Yeah, oh, do I second it? Oh.
Everyone else is here.
Is there any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll call for a voice vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Yeah. With that, the next item is the election of a chair. Would anyone like to nominate a member to serve as chair?
I nominate Kale Jaffe.
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing no further nominations, is there any discussion on the nomination to elect Mr. Jaffe? Hearing none, I'll call for a voice vote for the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? With that, the motion carries. So congratulations, you're the chair. That means I get to hand this gavel and this little script to you.
Oh, wow. All right. So did you approve the minutes or did you approve the agenda for the current meeting?
Agenda for the current meeting.
All right, so we'll do we didn't have to abstain from the agenda. We will have to abstain from the minutes. All right. All right, the next agenda item is to review and approve minutes from the December 5th, 2025 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Motion and a second?
I'll second.
Second. All right, is there any discussion? Hearing none, call for a voice vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
I think
Aye.
I need to abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
Yeah, actually, I think that's right. Yeah.
All right, so we only have
Just me. Yay.
You're
You're welcome, everybody.
carries to get us our minutes approved. All right, the motion carries with a vote of 1-0 to several abstentions. The next agenda item is the final exempt regulations, implementation of chapters 1027 and 1045 of the 2026 Acts of the Virginia General Assembly, Senate Bill 767 and House Bill 312, regulations for the control of motor vehicle emissions in the Northern Virginia area, presented by Ms. Wack. Is she here? Excellent, thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Wack, and I'm the Regulatory Analyst for the Air Division at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. I wanted to thank you all for being here today and taking the time to review the 3 final exempt regulatory actions that will be before you. I'll provide an overview of each action, and there will be an opportunity for questions following each presentation prior to making a department recommendation. This first action concerns Virginia's Inspections and Maintenance Program, which amends emission inspection procedures to implement Chapters 1045 and 1027 of the 2026 Acts of Assembly. The inspection and maintenance program requires biennial motor vehicle inspections in the Northern Virginia area as well as the Ozone Transport region. The statutory authority for program implementation coincides with the Federal Clean Air Act, which prescribes inspection and maintenance in the non-attainment areas as well as the Ozone Transport region. The Ozone Transport region contains 12 states, and it was established to control nitrous oxides as well as volatile organic compounds, which are ozone precursors. It also recognizes that ground-level ozone travels across state lines. As a vehicle owner, the options for inspection contain either visiting a certified emission station or completing rapid pass on-road testing. House Bill 312 and Senate Bill 767, enacted as Chapter 1045 and 1027 of the 2026 Acts of Assembly, amends emissions inspection waiver eligibility requirements in Section 46.2-1181 of the Code of Virginia. These next two slides explain a little bit more about what a waiver is, as well as its implications in the state. If a vehicle fails an initial emissions inspection, the owner has 14 days to complete repairs and return the vehicle for reinspection. All vehicles must receive a passing emissions inspection or receive a waiver to register or renew their registration with the DMV. Emissions inspection waivers may be issued considering that the following apply. Emissions control system component parts have not been tampered with or removed, and operable emissions control system component parts are unavailable. Emissions-related repair costs meet the dollar threshold of $10.90, and there are also no visible smoke emissions. These repairs will be completed to reduce exhaust and evaporative emissions, and they'll be required before the waiver would be issued up to that $10.90 threshold. This next slide provides further context to emphasize the minute impact that waivers have had in Virginia to date. As you can see in the image, this is a vehicle emissions inspection. And the first table that you see on the left shows initial failures from the years 2021 through 2025. The second table on the right shows the counts and percentages of the waivers issued within the pool of those initial failures. So if we take 2025, for example, out of the over 860,000 vehicles inspected, only 14,628, or 1.7% of those vehicles failed initially. Only 147 waivers were issued for that year, so that's 1% of all failures, or 0.017% of all inspected vehicles. House Bill 312 and Senate Bill 767 are identical bills. The language in these bills allows vehicles that have failed an initial emissions inspection to qualify for an emissions inspection waiver if, when the vehicle is presented for reinspection, the onboard diagnostic system is in a not ready condition to be tested. The onboard diagnostic system, or the OBD system, is a computerized emissions control diagnostic system that's installed on model year 1996 or newer vehicles. It monitors engine performance, emissions, other critical systems, and it also provides trouble codes. The not ready condition really means that a vehicle's computer has not had an opportunity to fully evaluate the vehicle's performance. This could happen for a number of reasons, including recent vehicle repairs, battery replacement, or incomplete drive cycles, for example. Within the State Air Pollution Control Board's regulations, we need to amend 9 VAC 5-91-420M3 as follows. And you can see that the red line language is the additional language. The vehicle continues to exceed applicable emission standards, or the vehicle's onboard diagnostic system is in a not ready condition to be tested when presented for reinspection, after emissions-related repairs required by 9 VAC 5-91-480 have been performed. This is an exempt final action under the Administrative Process Act, specifically Section 2.2-4006 A4A, establishes that amendments are exempt from state administrative procedures for adoption of regulations if they are necessary to conform with changes in Virginia statutory law. It also establishes that such regulations shall be filed with the registrar within 90 days of the law's effective date. The law was effective July 1st, 2026, so it must be submitted to the registrar for publication by September 29th. At this point, I'd like to pause for any questions.
Any members of the board have questions? Mr. Schitt?
Do we have any idea how often this happens?
It doesn't happen often. If we go back to this table, you can see that through 2021 through 2025, only on average about 1.7% of vehicles initially failed. Within the amount of waivers, you can see that only 147 were issued last year out of the initial over 860,000 that were inspected.
And it's
So
going
it
to be a
doesn't
small
happen.
fraction of that small number.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, I mean, a vehicle can be issued a waiver
Someone was,
considering all of
So,
these elements, and an onboard diagnostic system being in a not ready condition is fairly unlikely. This bill, let's see, it was introduced, Senate Bill 767 was introduced by Chief Patron Luther Cyphers III, and he's on a transportation committee, so we can't really speculate why this was added to the bill, but we can guess that, maybe he heard from a citizen who wanted to see this change introduced in state regulation.
Any other questions from the board? Just one, if I understand it, it's essentially saying you get inspected, didn't pass, you go show you've spent at least $1,090, go back, you qualify for the waiver, and that's a very small subset that tried to get their car back in compliance and for whatever reason.
That's correct.
All right, Ms. Wack, can you proceed with the staff recommendation?
The department recommends that the board adopt the proposal with an effective date consistent with section 2.2-4015A of the Administrative Process Act, and that in adopting this proposal, the board affirms that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision as provided in section 2.2-4006B of the Administrative Process Act.
All right, is there a motion to accept the staff recommendation?
I'll move.
Mr. Garbo?
Yes.
Second?
I'll second.
Second, Ms. Beamer? Awesome. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, I call for a voice vote for the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Wack.
Thank you.
All right, the next agenda item is final exempt regulations, implementation of Chapter 397 of the 2026 Acts of the Virginia General Assembly, House Bill 507, relating to new and modified stationary sources. Again, Ms. Wack will be presenting.
This next action establishes emission standards for engine generator sets located at data centers within the State Air Pollution Control Board's regulations. Air Permit Guidance 576, or APG 576, establishes diesel engine generator set procedures for writing new and modified permits. DEQ updated this guidance in December of 2025 to address requirements for permit approval for emergency and non-emergency diesel engine generator sets located at data centers. It specifies Tier 4 equivalent controls as presumptive best available control technology, or BACT, which achieves the maximum degree of emission reduction considering energy, environmental, and economic impacts. The 2012 version, so the previous version before this update in 2025, did not specify any sources, so it was non-specific to data centers. This latest version maintains the requirements for non-data facilities, so there's no change there. It's specific to data centers. It also applies to permit applications received on or after July 1st of 2026. House Bill 507, enacted as Chapter 397 of the 2026 Virginia Acts of Assembly, essentially codifies this existing guidance issued by DEQ. It does so by adding a new section codified at Section 10.1-1322.6, which sets emission limits for engine generator sets at data center facilities which submit a permit application on or after July 1st, 2026. As discussed, this is fully established within the authority of what DEQ has already done in the 2025 revision of APG 576. This is an excerpt from 10.1-1322.6 of the Code of Virginia, which establishes that the department shall not issue such permit unless the emission limit for each genset established by such permit is equal to or less than the emissions achieved by a Tier 4 equivalent genset. It defines Tier 4 equivalent as a genset with the following controls: selective catalytic reduction system or equivalent for nitrous oxides control, diesel oxidation catalyst or equivalent for carbon monoxide control, as well as a diesel particulate filter or equivalent for particulate matter. This image that you see below shows the various components of a genset mounted together. We have the common base, the generator, the engine, as well as the control panel. This next slide contains a breakdown of the tier ratings for engines. In a Tier 2 genset on the left, you can see that emissions are reduced by inherent engine design compared to pre-2005 engines by using fuel injection and catalytic converters. On the right, you see Tier 2 equivalent as well as Tier 4 certified. Tier 4 equivalent is a retrofitted genset with add-on controls to meet Tier 4 performance, whereas a Tier 4 certified genset is manufactured with carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and nitrous oxide after-treatment controls. In a Tier 4 equivalent genset, there is no potential automatic shutdown due to after-treatment control system failures, whereas with a Tier 4 certified genset, the engine shuts down if any of the after-treatment control systems fail. The key here is that both of these options emit 90% less nitrous oxides as well as particulate matter, and that's the purpose of Tier 4 emission standards. I also wanted to stress that in DEQ issued permits, permit writers specify that gensets cannot operate unless after-treatment control systems are also operating. Within the State Air Pollution Control Board's regulation, we must add a new article in Chapter 50, specifically Article 7, to reflect these emission standards and meet the statutory requirements of House Bill 507. Similar to the first action, this is also an exempt final. Under Section 2.2-4006A4A, it is necessary to conform with changes in Virginia statutory law. It must also be filed within 90 days of the law's effective date with the registrar. At this point, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Any member of the board have a question? Ms. Shelton?
Yeah, just a quick question, more for clarification. Regarding the Tier 4 equivalent with no potential automatic shutdown due to after-treatment control system failures, how likely does that happen? How often, if there's a way to?
I did want to stress, we do have a subject matter expert here who's going to be doing a presentation on these gensets, and I think that he might be able to speak to the frequency of that a little bit more. We have different divisions, so our permitting team would be able to assist with that question more than I would from a regulatory perspective.
Great.
So if he's not able to answer your question within his existing presentation, then there will also be an opportunity for questions with him.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So, what provisions are there for reporting on the use of these gensets? Do we keep records on the use of these gensets?
Yes, within our permits, we also have inspectors that go out for these regulated facilities. So they complete their inspections, but also within the permit that's issued for a particular facility, there's limits on the amount of pollutants that they're able to use, also the hours that they're able to operate certain gensets. So it's regulated at the beginning before they're even operated by DEQ, and then also insured through inspections.
Chairman, I can just add a little point of information. So we have an ongoing project that just started recently that is going to create, hopefully by January, a database system that will track all of this, and we'll be asking committees to do it online, so versus going to the facility. So hopefully we'll get more transparency and visibility next year.
Great.
Is that tracking system specific just to the data centers, or, okay?
Yeah, Mr. Garber. Yeah, are there any data center permits that have been submitted for kind of DEQ review between July 1st of this year and today's date? I mean, there's like a 6-week delta when this would be retroactive to those? What's the status there?
I would also defer to Stan on that question. Unfortunately, I'm not in the department that would receive those applications. So I'm not aware if there have been applications submitted. I don't want to speculate either way, so I'll let him answer that question.
My name's Angie Jenkins. I'm the Air Division Director for DEQ. We did not have to wait. If I understand your question, we did not have to wait for the regulations to start implementing the law. We've been implementing the law effective with its legal date on July.
Okay, so, that was the basis of the question, to see whether there was any risk associated with permit applications that have been submitted post July 1st, but before the regulations have been effectively amended.
We follow the law. We do like to have our regulations updated to be reflective of it, and that's what this process is for.
Point of information, we also already have guidance effective, so it's belt and suspenders.
Yeah, the APG 576 that I mentioned, that applied to applications that were received after July 1st, so that was already within DEQ's authority. The law just essentially codified that within the Code of Virginia, and we're looking to update our regulations to also make sure that it's regulatory matching with what we have in the Code of Virginia.
Any additional questions? All right, does staff have a recommendation?
The department recommends that the board adopt the proposal with an effective date consistent with section 2.2-4015A of the APA, and that in adopting this proposal, the board affirms that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision as provided in section 2.2-4006B of the APA.
All right, is there a motion to accept the staff recommendation?
Yeah, I move that we accept the recommendation.
Mr. Shob, is second?
A second.
Ms. Shetler? All right, any discussion? Hearing none, I call for a voice vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Beck. We've
Thank
got
you.
one more final exempt regulation on the agenda. This is related to implementation of the 2015 Ozone NAAQS, National Ambient Air Quality Standards, in a case-by-case RAC determinations. And again, Ms. Beck will be presenting for us.
Thank you. So this action is also an exempt final, and as mentioned, it amends Virginia's case-by-case RACT, or Reasonably Available Control Technology, regulation to formally implement EPA's 2015 ozone standards. To provide a little bit of background on reasonably available control technology, EPA defines RACT as the lowest emission limitation that a source is capable of meeting by the application of control technology that is reasonably available considering technological and economic feasibility. Technological feasibility here means available and well proven, whereas economic feasibility means that the operating cost of the pollution control is proportionate to the environmental benefit. EPA prescribes control technique guidelines, or CTGs, as well as alternative control techniques, or ACTs. These are used to help determine VOC and NOx RACT. They apply to major stationary source types as well as categories. Separately, we have non-CTG RACT, which are case-by-case determinations. They apply to major sources of VOC and NOx that are not covered by CTGs or ACTs. A source must have the potential to emit at least 50 tons per year of VOC or 100 tons per year of NOx as that major threshold. So EPA basically gives the definition of RACT and supporting CTGs and ACTs, whereas states develop their own RACT regulations. Here I just wanted to highlight the difference between RACT and BACT, as well as layer. Reasonably available control technology, or RACT, applies to existing major sources of VOC and NOx in non-attainment areas as well as the ozone transport region. Best available control technology, or BACT, applies to new or modified major stationary sources and attainment areas. RACT achieves the lowest reasonable emission limitation considering technological and economic feasibility, meaning that the controls implemented may not be the most absolute stringent, whereas BACT achieves the maximum degree of emission reduction considering energy, environmental, and economic impacts. The purpose of RAC is NAAQS compliance, as well as meeting Clean Air Act and corresponding OTR requirements, whereas the purpose of BACT is the prevention of air quality significant deterioration. Here I also wanted to mention layer, which is the lowest achievable emissions rate. This applies in non-attainment areas as well as the ozone transport region. It applies to new and modified major stationary sources. These sources must install the most stringent emission limitation that is achievable in practice where cost is not a barrier. RECT must be implemented in the ozone transport region to satisfy Federal Clean Air Act requirements. Section 176A of the Clean Air Act establishes the ozone transport region, and Section 184 requires RECT in the ozone transport region regardless of air quality. The image on the right displays the states that are a part of the ozone transport region. Accordingly, ozone planning efforts in Virginia must cover both the Northern Virginia 2015 Ozone NAAQS non-attainment area and the OTR, which includes the additional jurisdiction of Stafford County. All in all, these correspond to Northern Virginia's emission control areas, specifically Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, Stafford, Alexandria, Fairfax, Falls Church, Manassas, and Manassas Park. EPA strengthened the primary and secondary ozone national ambient air quality standard, or NAAQS, to 0.070 parts per million or 70 parts per billion on October 16, 2015, by adding section 50.19 as well as Appendix U to 40 CFR Part 50. EPA later specified dates where RECT must be implemented in non-attainment areas and the ozone transport region for the 2015 ozone NAAQS in December of 2018. The bullet points that you see below are the standards that have been established. The first standard for ozone was in 1979, established at 124 parts per billion averaged over an hour. The next standard was in 1997 at 84 parts per billion over 8 hours. The 2008 standard was 75 parts per billion averaged over 8 hours. And finally, the 2015 standard was 70 parts per billion averaged over 8 hours. The image that you see to the right establishes how ground level ozone is formed. It's created by chemical reactions between nitrous oxides as well as volatile organic compounds in the presence of heat and sunlight. The impact of sunlight in ozone formation is why you might see certain facilities or sources curtailing their operations into the evening. This next slide demonstrates the RACT process in Virginia for each ozone standard implemented. RACT has been an iterative process completed for each standard, which evaluates the same or smaller universes of sources each time. The 1979 standard, DEQ completed approximately 20 top-down analyses and multiple facilities relied on presumptive RACT. For the 97 standard, DEQ reevaluated previous RACT determinations. In 2008, approximately 5 additional top-down analyses for 2 municipal waste facilities, 2 compressor stations, and 1 electric generating unit were completed. In 2015, DEQ is reevaluating previous RACT determinations. I wanted to define what a top-down analysis is. A source is asked to identify all available control technology or options, evaluate technical feasibility, rank the remaining options by effectiveness, and finally evaluate economic feasibility. Upon that point, DEQ makes a determination of what is reasonable. This next slide demonstrates Virginia-specific data, which was extracted from the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia inventory for the 2015 ozone NAAQS non-attainment area. As you can see, it compares non-CTG facilities to other sources. Virginia has 12 non-CTG sources, and it addresses a small portion of the overall emissions inventory. Non-CTG sources contribute roughly 9% of nitrous oxides and 0.3% of volatile organic compounds to Northern Virginia's emissions. Within the State Air Pollution Control Board's regulations, we must add the 2015 8-hour ozone standard to Article 51 of 9 VAC 5-40, which is the emission standards for stationary sources subject to case-by-case RACT determination, in order to implement RACT in accordance with federal requirements. This action is also an exempt final. It's exempt under Section 2.2-4006 A4C of the APA. It is necessary to meet the requirements of Federal Clean Act, and it does not materially differ from the pertinent EPA regulations. The registrar's exemption determinations shall also be published within the Virginia Register not less than 30 days prior to the effective date of the regulation. At this point, I'll pause for any potential questions that you might have.
Any questions? Ms. Shuttler?
Yeah, just a quick one. Is the top-down analysis that you described the same thing as what EPA would mandate, or is that part of the discretionary component?
So here you can see EPA prescribes the top two, which are controlled technique guidelines, as well as ACTs. And so basically the process in Virginia is that if a facility is in the ozone transport region, they must evaluate, or DEQ must evaluate their potential to emit. And if they're within that major threshold at the bottom, so if they're above 50 tons per year or 100 tons per year of NOx, they're going to be subject to RACT. It's just a matter of if there's a CTG or ACT that EPA has prescribed that applies to them. And then if not, that facility must complete, they're mandated by the Federal Clean Air Act to complete a top-down analysis that they would then submit to DEQ. So it might not be presumptive RACT, something that's prescribed by EPA that they believe to be generally achievable. It's more about if they reach that major threshold, which triggers the process of RACT regardless of if it's prescribed by EPA or if that facility completes the top-down analysis themselves. And a source would have the option to meet presumptive RACT or to complete a top-down analysis, though many sources opt to meet presumptive as opposed to going through that process.
Mr. Dominich?
Yeah, can we just talk a little bit about why we're discussing an amendment related to a 2015 rule in 2026?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, this was missed in the past. We only have one regulatory analyst for the air division. The one reason that it might have been missed is because the work within our SIP, so anything that's federally enforceable, we have to submit up to EPA in our state implementation plan. So our SIP work and the corresponding RACT work has been ongoing with facilities nonetheless, even in the absence of this regulatory revision. We've been working with these sources for years over the course of the implementation of these various standards. So now that we've caught it, we're formally introducing it into our regulations, though this is more of a paper exercise. It hasn't changed the actual work that's ongoing in Virginia.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify, we've been in compliance, we just haven't done the paperwork.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Can you just, I'm curious, are we in attainment, is Northern Virginia in attainment for the NAAQS for ozone under the 2015 standard?
Yeah, Northern Virginia is currently undergoing a redesignation request and maintenance plan. So once that is, undergoes public comment and is formally approved by EPA, then it would be formally in attainment. But that's ongoing work right now.
Do you have a sense of the timeline for that?
I think I could ask my coworker Doris to come up and speak to it, or maybe she can just stand.
Yeah, hi, I'm Doris McLeod. I work in the Air Quality Planning Group under Tom Luke. We're trying to get that redesignation request and maintenance plan to EPA by December 31st.
Thank you, Doris.
Any other questions? All right, is there a staff recommendation?
The department recommends that the board adopt the proposal with an effective date consistent with section 2.2-4015 of the APA, and that in adopting this proposal, the board affirms that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions at any time by any person with respect to reconsideration or revision as provided in section 2.2-4006B of the APA.
All right, is there a motion to accept the staff recommendation?
Motion?
Vice Chair, second?
Second.
Mr. Garbo? All right, any discussion? Hearing none, I call for a voice vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Rapp.
Thank you.
We've got some reports to the board on agenda items coming up. The next agenda item is a report to the board on anticipated forthcoming regulatory actions. And the floor is again yours.
Thank you very much. So this next slide is just a snippet of what you can expect to see in the next 12 months before you. The first action I'll discuss is federal documents incorporated by reference. This is an annual amendment. This amendment will be made to reflect the Code of Federal Regulations as published on July 1st of 2026. This will also be an exempt final regulatory action. The purpose of this annual update is to incorporate newly promulgated as well as amended Federal New Source Performance Standard, or NSPS's, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, or NESHAPs, and National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants for certain source categories, which is also known as the Maximum Achievable Control Technology, or MACT standards. The second action you can expect to see before you concerns the secondary SO2 NACs. The SO2 has been amended to an annual averaged over 3 consecutive years with a level of 10 parts per billion. Existing Virginia monitoring data shows that Virginia will have no problem meeting this standard. For example, from all of our monitors from 2022 to 2024, there was an average 3-year design value of 0.67 parts per billion, well under the 10 parts per billion metric. So these are the next 2 actions that I can confidently say you'll see within the next 12 years. Obviously, things are always changing, so there might be something added to this list.
And you said 12 years, I believe you meant 12 months, is that?
12 months,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
A long horizon.
Very long horizon.
Yeah.
My apologies.
No worries. All right, any questions on this forthcoming regulatory actions presentation? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Wack, for
Thank you very
all
much
of
for your
work
time.
this morning.
Thank you.
Leading up to it. All right, I believe we've got Ms. Jenkins next on controversial permits for DEQ.
Good morning. My name is Auntie Jenkins, and I am the Air Division Director for the Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you all for your participation on the board. I look forward to working with you. I am new to my role as well, so as well as some of you are new to your roles, so I look forward to learning together and working together going forward. I also want to thank Julia for doing a great job with the regulatory updates. That is not an easy job, and Julia is newer to her position as well, and she did a fantastic job for the period she was standing up here. And she's going to really show me up today. I am not used to giving presentations where I need to look both ways at once and maybe down a little bit, so I will struggle through and do the best that I can. Please bear with me. So I am here today to report to the board on controversial permits. This is something that you're likely to see on the agenda going forward. It is a requirement of state law that we provide this report to you. Virginia Code Section 10.1-1184.1 requires that the agency provide the board with an overview and update regarding any controversial permits pending before the department. That section also requires that immediately after the presentation, the board be provided an opportunity to respond to the presentation and provide commentary regarding such pending permits. Controversial permit is a defined term in code. It includes any air permitting action where a public hearing is required for the construction of a new major source or for a major modification to an existing source, a new fossil fuel fired generating facility with a capacity of 500 megawatts or more, or a major modification to an existing source that is a fossil fuel fired generating station with a capacity of 500 megawatts or more. A new fossil fuel fired compressor station facility used to transport natural gas, or a major modification to an existing source that is a fossil fuel-fired compressor station facility used to transport natural gas. A controversial permit also means an air permitting action for which a public hearing has been granted pursuant to criteria set forth in 10.1-1184.1C, including pursuant to the director's discretion. So this map of Virginia, or at least most of Virginia, I think we cut off the tip. This map shows you the where the six proposed air permitting activities are located, including proposals in central Virginia and then as far west as Montgomery County. And so these are the six actions that we'll be discussing today. First is Amazon Data Services. Amazon Data Services submitted an application to our Northern Regional Office for a state major permit to construct and operate emissions facilities at a data center to be located in Caroline County, Virginia. This is a controversial permit by definition because it's for a new major source of air emissions. The emissions units for the proposed facility include 306 2.75 megawatt generators or gensets. As you can see on the chart over here, the potential to emit for nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide from those units are above major source thresholds, and that's why this activity is on the controversial permit list. The applicant has proposed Tier 4 equivalent controls for the units, including selective catalytic reduction to reduce emissions of NOx, catalyzed diesel particulate filter to reduce emissions of particulates, volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde. And then they're proposing ultra-low sulfur diesel to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxides. This permitting action is still being processed by staff in our Northern Regional Office. If or when a draft permit is ready, it will be put out for public notice and comment, and then a public hearing will be scheduled on that permit. We have another Amazon Data Services application on the list today. Amazon Data Services submitted an application to our Northern Regional Office for a state major permit to construct and operate emissions units for a data center to be located in Louisa County. This is on the list as a controversial permit because it would be for a new major source of emissions. The emissions units for the proposed facility would include 272 2.75 megawatt generators or gensets. The emissions of nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide are above state major thresholds, which again is why this application is on the list for our report today. The applicant has proposed Tier 4 equivalent controls for this facility for these units, including selective catalytic reduction for emissions of nitrogen oxides, catalyzed diesel particulate filters for emissions of particulate carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and formaldehyde. And they are proposing to use ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. This application is still being processed by staff in our Northern Regional Office. If or when a draft permit is ready, it will be put out for public notice and comment, and a public hearing will be scheduled. Point 1, Richmond submitted an application for a state major permit to construct and operate a proposed data center with on-site generation in Charles City County. This is a controversial permit as a new major source of emissions. The emissions units for the facility include 252 3-megawatt Tier 2 gensets, 18 800 kilowatt Tier 2 gensets, approximately 35 18 megawatt natural gas turbines. The emissions, as you can see, are above major source thresholds, but still below prevention of significant deterioration thresholds. The applicant has proposed to install selective catalytic reduction to control NOx from the 252 gensets and all of the natural gas turbines. For particulate, carbon monoxide, and VOC, they're proposing good combustion practices, and then they're proposing to utilize low sulfur fuels, including natural gas and ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. This application is still being processed by our Piedmont Regional Office. If or when a draft permit is prepared, it will be put out for public comment, and a public hearing will be scheduled. Expedition Generation submitted an application for a prevention of significant deterioration new source review permit to construct and operate a proposed new 1,600 megawatt natural gas combustion combined cycle power plant in Fluvanna County. This facility is proposed to be sited next to another natural gas fired power plant that's a 940 megawatt plant in Fluvanna. This is a controversial permit, again, because it's a new major source of emissions. The primary emissions units for the facility include the two combined cycle combustion turbines. As you can see, the potential to emit for the turbines are above major source and above prevention of significant deterioration levels. And so, again, that's why they've applied for the PSD permit and why they're on this list. The applicant has proposed to control NOx, dry low NOx burners, and selective catalytic reduction. They've proposed oxidation catalysts to control emissions of carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and formaldehyde. And they're proposing low sulfur fuels, including natural gas and ultra-low sulfur diesel, to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide and particulates. The applicant held its PSD briefing for the public on July 28th of this year. Staff are still processing this permit application. Once a draft permit if or when a draft permit has been prepared, it will be put out for public notice and comment, and a public hearing will be scheduled. Northrop Grumman has a permit to construct and operate, has a minor source permit to construct and operate a manufacturing facility in Waynesboro to manufacture electronic components as part of their aerospace business. They have also submitted an application, and that's the matter before us today, an application for a state operating permit to establish federally enforceable limits for hazardous air pollutants. The state operating permit is the mechanism that we utilize to satisfy EPA requirements for setting federally enforceable limits for facilities. This is a controversial permit pursuant to section 10.1-1184.1C and the director's discretion. This facility, as I said, manufactures electronic components. As part of that process, they use a lot of solvents in their spray booths, so it's the solvents that have the materials that could ultimately end up as hazardous air pollutants, including toluene, xylene, and MIBK. The draft permit establishes limits, as I said, for the hazardous pollutants to keep them below federal major source thresholds. The permit establishes a limit for any single hazardous air pollutant at 9.9 tons per year, and then total hazardous air pollutants are limited to 24.9 tons per year. The draft permit was put out for public comment, and a public hearing was held on July 23rd. Our staff in our Valley Regional Office are summarizing the comments that were received and preparing a response to comments document. Once those documents are ready, they will be published, and there will be a second hearing for folks who participated and submitted comments to then provide comments on the summary of comments document and the response to comments document. Mountain Valley Pipeline submitted an application for a minor new source review permit to construct and operate a new natural gas compressor station in Montgomery County. That application was submitted to our Blue Ridge Regional Office. It is a controversial permit by definition because it's for a new natural gas compressor station. The emissions units proposed for that facility include natural gas turbines and natural gas fired microturbines. You can see the potential to emit there in the proposed controls, including solar NOx, selective catalytic reduction for nitrogen oxides, catalytic oxidation for carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and formaldehyde, and then the use of low sulfur fuels to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide. On June 12th of this year, the agency advised the applicant that we did not have sufficient information to continue processing that application, and we have stopped processing that application. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to try to answer any questions and to take any comments.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Any questions? Yeah, Mr. Garbutt.
Question about the .1 Richmond facility. I was curious, it lays out Tier 2 gensets, and I assume, I'm just trying to dovetail that with the reg amendment that we just sort of passed requiring Tier 4 equivalent. And my assumption is that it's because the permit was applied for in December of 2025. Is that the reason?
That's why the applicant would have proposed Tier 2. That's probably why the applicant would have proposed Tier 2 controls. And these controls are the proposed controls out of the application. As I said, that permit is still being processed by our staff, and so it is still going through best available control technology reviews by the staff. But yes, you're correct. That's, I suspect, why the applicant would have proposed Tier 2 engines.
Any other questions? Yeah, sorry.
I do have
Ms.
a
Beamer.
question about the controversial permits that are classified as controversial because they're new major sources. Makes sense to me, but if there's a facility for the gensets that are being modified or potentially being modified, are those, I guess, what's the difference in a certain number of Tier 2 gensets versus some that have a lower amount of Tier 4 or vice versa? At what point are you just trading numbers to reach that limit? I guess, if my question makes sense.
I think I understand your question, and forgive me if I'm being dense. I'm often dense on the hot seat. The major source thresholds and major modification thresholds are specific emissions criteria. So if a source is proposing or has emissions above, for a criteria pollutant of above 100 tons per year, potential to emit, then that throws you into the category of major. And that can throw you into, and that's where you also would be a major modification. Things below that are considered minor. Now, the definition, am I going the right way? Oh no, I'm going the wrong way. The definition does include other sources, but that major and major modification, I think, is what you were asking about, and that's just based
Okay.
on emissions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shope?
So, just a question about the point one. Point one facility this is behind the meter generation?
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right? And so, this is not going to be covered by Reggie, for example. The emissions won't be covered by.
As I understand the definitions that apply for Reggie right now, that is correct. And
Just
I'm sure someone will correct it in a later presentation on Reggie if I've gotten that wrong.
And just to follow up on Mr. Shope's question, they similarly wouldn't be covered by the Virginia Clean Economy Act targets as well? So that's utility-specific generation, is that right?
Well, the Clean Air Economy Act has some specific provisions, I think, that apply to the state corporation commission's work with respect to other provisions of the Clean Economy Act. Those specifically relate to our participation in Reggie, and so I think, yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jaffe. I did not mean to not defer to the
please.
chair.
I'll answer to whoever calls on me, so it's okay. Just a clarification, and I'm new to this, but I understand that some of these permit applications will go through public comment as well as public hearing. You mentioned that for two of them. For the other permit applications, the Amazon facilities, for example, will there be a public hearing automatically because it's a controversial permit, or is it subject to the discretion because it falls within the .1C? How does that work?
There will be a public hearing for those both of those Amazon data services applications because they are proposed. They're proposed state major sources.
Thank you.
I had a question about the 3 data center permits. So those were all clusters of several smaller gensets, so 306 2.75 megawatt gensets, and in Caroline County, and you do the math on that one, that's 841 megawatts, which is similar in size to what you might see from like a combined cycle gas plant. And just curious, do we have a sense of what a permitted 840 megawatts of 300 smaller gensets, what that emissions profile looks like compared to, let's say, one large combined cycle gas plant? Like, assuming the same megawatts.
I don't know that we have prepared that, but that is, I think you can, well, we have a 1,600 megawatt on there, so it's not an apples to apples. I don't think that we have that sort of information, but I can try to get back to you with that.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I just had one follow-up question. We're for the data centers, we have potential to emit. Is that potential to emit amount based on, in many cases, these appear to be backup generators? Are they intended to be run all the time? Is that their full and potential to emit? How is that calculated?
They are backup generators, and so that's calculated based on their projected full projected run times, but not as primary power for those facilities.
So how does the applicant say, you know, we project that we would need to run these generators X days a year, and that's how we calculate that number?
They tell us what they planned, how they plan to operate the facility, and then we look at the worst-case scenarios of
Okay,
that
that's,
operation.
okay, thank you.
Other questions, Ms. Shetler?
Yeah, one last question. I'm sure there are reporting requirements that the facility or the applicant must provide or guarantee through time. Does DEQ do any kind of independent assessment of their compliance?
Yes, we have inspectors who go out to facilities, depending on the size of the facility, the opportunities that we have to get out there may be more frequent or not. It is a risk-based approach that we take to compliance. We have about 30 inspectors across the state and over 3,000 facilities. We also have reports that we receive annually, and we are sort of cross-checking those reports with information that we have. There are reports that have to be submitted that we review, looking for various things, and then we do try to get out to facilities when we can.
I just had one more question. Your question sort of prompted my thought process. Is that one of the final exempt regulations that we talked about in the beginning that specified the Tier 4 for the data centers? If those modifications are sort of newer, or they're major modifications, how are the numbers for the predicted emissions that were included in the chart, how are those arrived at if that is sort of a newer modification to those gensets, or even new construction of those gensets for the data centers?
For a facility that's proposing to use, the potential to amend is based on the units that the facility is proposing to use. If through the best available control technology analysis that the agency goes through, we determine that they should be able to get lower numbers pursuant to our analysis, then those numbers may adjust downward as we go through the process. But those are the numbers that were proposed by the applicant based on what they are proposing to use for their controls. Does that?
But it does, but like what happens if it's, I mean, I guess the potential for it to be wildly inaccurate is pretty low, but what happens if it is not that? What happens if the permit is granted for the data centers and the emissions are significantly higher?
Then we would, then they would be violating their permits, the limits that we set, and we would be taking enforcement action.
Okay.
And looking at our authorities in that regard.
Just one more sort of follow-up on Ms. Beamer's question. In looking at the new regs from Ms. Wack's presentation, there was and maybe this is a better question for her, but just the Tier 2 application, and then whether we would apply, or whether DEQ would apply the sort of the Tier 4 standard. There were two there. There was Tier 4 equivalent for existing facilities, and then Tier 4 certified for new facilities. So do you know if DEQ is looking at the Tier 4 certified as part of the permit review process on that, on those new applications?
We do not, I'm not aware, these applications do not include proposals to use Tier 4 certified. We do have the two Amazon facilities that are proposing Tier 4 equivalent. Stan Faggart is going to do a presentation specific to the data centers and how those permitting processes work and the regulations that apply. But our permits require you to be operating your control equipment when you're running the engines. So the Tier 4 certified automatically shuts you down. Our permit sort of steps in a similar manner.
Great. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Ms. Jenkins. It's super helpful.
Thank you.
We will, there's no action item here, so we'll just move on to the next agenda item, which is a report from Mr. Faggart on air regulations and actions that apply to data centers.
Thank you.
While Mr. Faggart's approaching getting that ready, just sort of another question I had related to Ms. Beamer's question about enforcement. I know in past years, the Air Board has received sort of a high priority violator report on some of the enforcement actions. Is that something you still do or might do down the road if necessary?
The chair would like if we can.
We'll talk about that, sure.
It's easy to do.
All right, Mr. Faggart, thank you.
Thank you. Everyone hear me? So, good morning. My name is Stan Faggart. I am the Minor New Source Review Coordinator with Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And I was selected to give you this presentation about general permitting of data centers as opposed to the specific examples that Angie was discussing with you all. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of some diagrams, concerning what is a data center. When somebody says there's this many data centers or that many data centers, what exactly are they talking about? So here we have a description of kind of a zoomed in view of a data center, which includes the buildings housing the data center's servers, and then the cooling systems and backup generators that serve those buildings, and then the power transmission element represented by the power lines, and then, of course, the line supplying water and fuel as necessary. And then this one steps back out a little bit to try to show the kind of the place or the role of the data center, kind of the overall electrical generation, transmission, and distribution systems, and how they fit in kind of the bigger picture. And these both kind of have an element in the definition of data center that we have from state law, which pause to catch up. Like Angie, I think I'm going to struggle a little bit about not seeing my slide and then making sure I'm speaking into the microphone. So a data center means a facility whose primary activities, right, or services are the storage, management, and processing of digital data. And I won't read the entire verbiage to you, but then the kind of the next element that I think is important and jumps off to me is something that we have on the next slide, which continues the definition. In equipment used for the transformation, transmission, distribution, or management of at least 1 megawatt of electrical capacity. So that's kind of really the only size-based metric that's part of this definition, right? That 1 megawatt threshold. So next we're going to switch over to, once we've kind of defined what a data center is, what are the regulatory responsibilities for various parts of a data center's operation. As you'll see here, many of these are DEQ's responsibility. Some are the localities. The next to last row is the air permits, which I'll be addressing here, which of course is DEQ's responsibility. I have noise in red. Traditionally, that has been a locality responsibility, but with the recent action of the General Assembly, DEQ will be starting the process to try to develop some noise regulations for data centers. I think the legislation gives us until the end of 2029 to get those in place. All All right, so now we're going to zoom in a little more specifically on the air permitting or air regulation requirements for data centers. Of course, the Air Board just finalized the proposed regulation that came from the General Assembly's action related to Tier 4 equivalent gensets. So that regulation is now in place. Other than that specific regulation you just passed, though, there really are only generally applicable regulations and air regs that apply to data centers the same way they do to other source categories. And then so what that means is for a data center, their primary source of air-related applicable requirements is going to be their individual site-specific permit. There are federal regs that apply, and I'm not sure whether Julia or Angie referenced those, but EPA has 3 engine regulations that they developed and passed in kind of the mid-2000s. I'll talk a little bit about those more in a further slide. But other than those I've just kind of gone through, there are really no other existing data center specific regulations. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual emission units that appear at most or the typical data center. And for us, as you know, permitting data centers, up till now anyway, the vast majority of our focus has been on the backup or emergency generators that a data center uses. Those are the units that generate, the majority of the emissions from a typical data center, both from an actual standpoint as well as a potential to emit standpoint. Some data centers also have cooling towers. Those tend to have small emissions. And then, of course, there's fuel tanks for the gensets, and they're typically very small emissions for those tanks because they are very small. We talked about primary power generation for one of the applications that Angie mentioned. I think that was the Point 1 in Charles City County. As of right now, we only have one operating data center that's generating their own power. That is a Vantage facility in Northern Virginia. Other than that one, I think we just have 2 pending applications. The one that Angie mentioned, the Point 1, and then we have a second one that came in July, which is also a Point 1 facility in Remington, Virginia. That one is not on the controversial permit list because their proposed emissions are below the major source thresholds. Oops. And again, I apologize if some of you are familiar with some of this content, but in case there were individual members who were not, just a little bit about the types of permits that DEQ issues. The main one that we have historically issued for data centers is a minor new source review regulation, or NSR, which is found in Chapter 80, Article 6 of our air regs. I've listed some of the other common ones we have here. In terms of data centers, really the only one that we've issued so far is we do have, and I'll talk about this in a little more detail, we do have 3 data centers that are subject to the Title V permitting program because their PTE is greater than 100 tons per year. So types of air permits, I mentioned new source review or NSR. Those are what we call pre-construction permits, permits that must be obtained by an applicant before they can begin construction of a new stationary source or a project at an existing stationary source. The other general category, or what we call operating permits, so NSR permits, Article 6 that we issue to most data centers, those are pre-construction. Title V operating permits are operating permits. Air new source review permits in Virginia are for both the construction of a stationary source and the operation. So unless you're a Title V, you don't need to come back to us to get a separate operating permit. And their new source review permits remain effective until the source proposes a change or a modification. They do not typically expire. And again, just to make sure we're kind of on somewhat of a common basis, these are the pollutants that are generally emitted by most data centers. These are the pollutants for which we have National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. Julie talked a little bit earlier about ozone and how that's formed. And then, of course, we have particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, lead, and carbon monoxide. I will say for data centers, nitrogen oxides is the pollutant that generally drives their permitting exercise. That's the pollutant that gets to major source thresholds the quickest. And so by managing nitrogen oxides, we typically are managing the rest of the pollutants. So a little bit more about Article 6, or minor new source review program. It is included in our state implementation plan, so those permits are enforceable both by Virginia, by DEQ, as well as the EPA. We do require best available control technology in those permit actions, whereas some states do not require BACT as part of their minor new source review regulations. In fact, some states don't have minor NSR programs at all. And I guess just Angie, I think, touched on this a little bit, but the threshold between minor versus major. In Northern Virginia, or most parts of Northern Virginia, that threshold is 100 tons per year per pollutant. And that is for all source categories, including data centers. Whereas outside of Northern Virginia, that threshold rises to 250 tons per year for most source categories, including data centers again. We do have some general permits in Virginia, including some for emergency gensets, but those are very rarely used by anyone, by any source category, because they're actually pretty inflexible, and no data center is being able to use them because data centers are just too large to use any of the general permits. So now we're talking a little bit more about minor versus major. I think I said earlier we do have 3 Title V facilities, data centers. 2 of those are in the northern Virginia. 1 of those is in the Richmond area. Most data, and I think this maybe went to one of the earlier questions, most data centers, if there were no permit in place, their unrestricted potential to emit would be well above major source levels, right? But when they apply to us for a permit, they don't want to have to get a major source permit, most of them. So they ask us and apply to have limitations placed in their permits. Typically, we do that by fuel, limiting the amount of fuel they can consume. So that entire collection of whether it's 270 gensets or whether it's 300 or however many they might have, we limit those units to a certain pool of fuel that they can use, which we can then calculate the emissions that set the permit limit based off those. And then that gives us a good enforcement mechanism. By tracking how much fuel they're using, we can kind of know what their emissions are. This is, I think, the same picture that Julia had earlier. I think, unfortunately, we tend to recycle some of our graphics. We're always on the lookout for new ones, though. So again, now we're talking about, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the content of some of our permits, or our data center permits. And one of the things we put in place, particularly in our Northern Virginia data center permits, is the requirement that when the facility operates their gensets, their emergency gensets, for maintenance and readiness testing, that they only do that, at least during our ozone season, during periods of the day We're basically where the temperatures are the lowest, which means at night, right? So we restrict them from doing that between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. During the ozone season, which I think runs from May 1st to September 30th, yes. We do, and perhaps this was another question we had earlier, we do require stack testing of data center gensets once they've been constructed at a particular facility to make sure the emissions from those units are what were represented to us in the applications and are what we permit, consistent with the limits that we put in the permit. So this gives us, at least an initial view that they should be able to comply with their permit. We do include hours per year limitations on that maintenance and readiness testing activity. What we have found over, 10 or 15 years of experience with some of the older data centers now is most of their actual emissions actually occur from these gensets, actually occur from the maintenance and readiness testing activities. Those are things that are happening 15 minutes a week, an hour a month, at certain durations, whereas it is somewhat rare that there is actually a loss of power at a data center that results in the genset operating for a true emergency event. That does happen, but most of the emissions actually occur from the maintenance and readiness testing. And then finally, again, just in terms of, I think there were some questions about compliance. We do require daily record keeping of most data center operations through their fuel usage or their hours of operation, and then the resulting emissions. I will say that is a somewhat more recent part or development with their permits. Some of the earlier ones didn't require that on a daily basis. As we've kind of gotten larger data centers with more gensets that themselves were more larger, we felt that it was wise to start kind of going down to a more discrete periods of time in terms of judging their compliance. And this is going to be some more overlap, I think, with some of Julia's content. Before July 1st of 2026, we had a BACT guidance document for diesel engine gensets at all source categories, not just data centers. This document dated back to, I think, roughly 2011 or 12, so shortly after EPA had put their engine rules in place. And this basically set two different standards for BACT, one for emergency units and one for non-emergency. For non-emergency units at that time, right, it was more or less Tier 4, what we're now calling Tier 4 equivalent controls. So the SCR for the control of NOx, oxidation catalyst for carbon monoxide, and the diesel particulate filter for particulate matter. Whereas for emergency units, it was really just the kind of basic Tier 2 controls that EPA had just rolled out for emergency engines at about that same time frame. Now that we have the legislation, now that we have our new revised guidance, and now that we have the regulation that the board just passed, for applications that we receive on and after July 1st, we will be setting the same BACT for both emergency and non-emergency gensets, and that BACT will be fully consistent with the Tier 4 equivalent requirements of the legislation. So using, and again, pretty much using the same control technologies. And just, I think, as Julia mentioned, that previous guidance is still in place for non-data center source categories that use genset. So I just talked a little bit about emergency. And so this is something that we put in our permits, or data center permits for the gensets that are designated as emergency units. There are a certain set of operating requirements. So when you apply to us for an emergency unit, And under the old paradigm, therefore did not have to put on as stringent controls. The trade-off for that was we would restrict those data center genset operation to a much more prescribed periods of time. So true emergencies, the maintenance and readiness testing that we described, and then something that the General Assembly put in place some time ago, which was operation for an independent system operator declared emergency. In Virginia, that is PJM. When they declared emergency, the General Assembly basically passed legislation that specified that operation during those events would count as emergency towards Virginia's definition. And then we just have some differences with EPA here. And really the primary one is the row for operation for other non-emergency purposes. EPA's definition of emergency allows 50 hours per year for those kinds of operations or events, whereas in Virginia we allow 0 hours for that, with one exception, and that exception was put in place again by the General Assembly back in 2025. That exception is for Department of Defense designated mission critical gensets. I have a little bit more about that on this next slide. So again, in 2025, we had Senate Bill 1407, and that basically provided that we, DEQ, had to give genset owners and operators that same 50-hour per year allowance for non-emergency use that EPA provides if those gensets were designated as mission critical by the Department of Defense or one of the service branches. And I guess more specifically to data centers here, there are no data centers that have been able to take advantage of that exclusion or that exemption. Now this slide, it gets a little tricky. Now that we basically are going to be saying to the data center applicants and operators that we're going to require the same controls for your gensets, whether you designate them as being emergency or whether you designate them as being non-emergency, we kind of anticipate that they're no longer going to apply to have them permitted as emergency units because they get the inflexible operation schedule that comes with that, but they no longer get any break for the control systems they have to construct on those gensets. And so we kind of are anticipating that going forward from July 1st and on, that all of the data center applications are really going to be applying to have their units designated as non-emergency. And so we've gotten some questions about, well, does that mean they're going to be able to operate those units a lot more since they now will be non-emergency versus the restricted operations of an emergency unit? And I guess in theory, yes, but I think as far as we've been able to tell, probably the answer is really no, is because they will still have to comply with their annual emission limits and those related annual fuel limits that we permit them at. And so most of them are so large, 200 units, 300 units, and those gensets themselves are so large that even with the controls, they will have very limited hours of operation they'll be able to operate during a year and to stay under their annual emission limits. Then also, I think the other thing I have here is EPA's engine rules do require Tier 4 certified units in order to operate beyond 50 hours per year for non-emergency use. So they would also still need to meet that number. Okay, so I've talked about the EPA rules a couple of times now. I don't know that the information here will be terribly of interest to you, but I did include it. There are three EPA engine rules. The first one here is a national emission standard for hazardous air pollutants, or what we sometimes commonly refer to as a MACT standard, M-A-C-T. This controls HAP emissions from new and existing diesel engine generator sets. I shouldn't say diesel, all fuels, all engine fuels. Whereas the next two, the new source performance standards, the first one is for compression ignition engines, which is diesel, and then the second one is for spark ignition, or SI, which tends to be natural gas or gasoline-fired engines. And again, as I talked about earlier, these were all developed in the mid-2000s. So at that point, Tier 2 technology compared to pre-NSBS engines was actually a pretty good reduction. And then Tier 4 was adding the add-on control systems on top of that for an even further reduction. Most folks in EPA, when they put those rules in place, EPA more or less required the manufacturers of engines to have a certification program so that most users of gensets or of engines actually comply with those EPA rules by purchasing certified units, certified by EPA. And again, we talked a little bit about this before. Tier 2, emissions reduced by inherent design. Tier 4 or Tier 4 certified engines that are manufactured actually with those control systems already on board. And then Tier 4 equivalent units tend to be Tier 2 units that were then had add-on control systems put on after they were manufactured. All right, now we'll get to some actual numbers. Need to catch up here in my version. So, permitted data center stationary sources. And we permit stationary sources, which has a distinct definition in the regs. And so I think you'll sometimes see, at least I will see, in Medius and other sources, like what seems to be a disagreement about the number of data centers that are present in the state of Virginia or a location within the state, right? So for us, a data center stationary source is all the data center related buildings that are on a contiguous property and under control of the same entity. So if, just using the Amazon example that Angie was talking about earlier, if Amazon had a data center or 6 data center buildings on one property or one campus, some people might count that as 6 data centers. But for us, since they're all under common control and they're all on one property, we would count that as a single data center stationary source, right? So using that method, we have 200 permitted data center stationary sources in Virginia. And then those 200 stationary sources are permitted with approximately 10,260 gensets with a combined capacity of around 26,100 megawatts. Just to give you an example of how that has developed over time, this graphic is actually just the data centers in our northern regional office, but the orange bar represents the megawatt, cumulative megawatt of capacity for those data centers that we permitted as of that year. So you can see how the megawatt capacity has increased over time. The next slide talks about pending data center applications. So Angie talked about 3 of them. The 3 of them that are defined meet the definition of controversial permit. We do have 39 total pending data center applications. 12 are for new stationary sources. 14 for projects at an existing data center that includes the addition of 10 or more new gensets at that data center, and then 13 are projects where the data center is planning to add less than 10 new gensets at that particular facility. And for this collection of applications, this represents approximately 2,440 new gensets, with around 7,000 megawatts of new capacity. And the majority of that is occurring at the new stationary sources. A couple other things that I was asked to present upon. So I think this is, again, has been something that's been a story in the media over the last year or two. There are no data centers in Virginia that are using or have proposed to use portable combustion turbines as non-road engines to power their facilities the way that I think it was OpenAI did in Memphis. No one is doing that. No one has proposed to do that here in Virginia. And also, again, I think this is even more recent than that kind of topic. There has been we've gotten kind of a lot of questions about the Department of Energy and issuing what they call, I guess, 202C orders to various independent system operators or grid operators like PJM to take data centers off the grid using their gensets in order to help PJM manage the grid. As of yet, no Virginia data center has operated as a result of any of those DOE orders. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about Virginia's air quality monitoring system. And you may not think that's directly related to data centers, but there is a tie-in at the end. So this map is a graphic with blue dots where we have all of our existing permanent ambient monitoring stations throughout the state. Then this is the next 3 or 4 slides are just the data we've had from those monitoring stations over a period of time. So this first one is ozone with the standard, I think, again, that Julie was referring to earlier, currently being 70 parts per billion. And you can see that over time, I guess back in the early 2000s, we were having some ozone problems. But we have now gotten below 70 everywhere. And I think this to Mr. Jaffe's question, we do actually have data showing us below the 70 even in Northern Virginia. It's just a matter of going through and completing the process of getting the EPA to recognize that, right? And again, as you would expect with that decrease in ozone data, the number of 8-hour ozone exceedance days in Northern Virginia has also declined precipitously over a period of time here. This is fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, particulate matter that has an aerodynamic diameter of 2.5 microns or less. So very, 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 very fine. Again, this data shows that from our monitors that the PM 2.5 ambient concentrations has also declined a fair amount over the time, with the current standard being 9 micrograms per cubic meter. And I think this is the last one. This is air NO2 monitoring data, or nitrogen dioxide. Again, the standard is 100 parts per billion, and we've been fairly consistently below half of that level throughout the state for, I guess, the last 10 or 15 years. Okay, so here's the tie-in. Again, we were getting have been and continue to get a lot of questions about the impact of data center operations on Virginia's ambient air quality. And we could show them those slides I just showed you, but there were still people who say, well, is that existing monitoring network enough? You know, there might be some spots that network is missing. And so what we have launched now in Northern Virginia for now is what we're calling a kind of a special monitoring study, where we have obtained portable sensors, which we have placed in certain spots, and I've got a slide where you'll see them next, in Northern Virginia, to try to get more data more ambient monitoring data around air monitors, not just at air monitors. And so we're doing this in phases. So this first phase, let me go on. So this is a blow up of parts of Northern Virginia with Dulles International Airport kind of there at the bottom of the screen. And then the blue dots represent individual permitted data center stationary sources in this area of the state. And then kind of the colored diamond there is kind of the area that we're currently studying with these portable sensors. And kind of the pentagon symbols are the current location of where we have those sensors in this area, right? And then the yellow, kind of the yellow triangle on the left side of the study area, that is one of our permanent monitoring stations. So we cited, purposely cited one of the portable sensors at one of our existing monitoring stations, just so we could get comparative data between those two, so that when we got data from the other 5 or 6, we would have a basis of comparison about how we're getting valid data or not. So we've been doing this for several months now. We've moved them around a couple times just to try to get a sampling. And air monitoring guys not here today. I think the plan is we're going to maybe operate here in Loudoun County for another month or 2. And then we're going to move them all to Prince William. Once we've kind of had 3 or 4 months of data in Loudoun, we're going to move them to Prince William County, kind of do the same thing there for several months. And what we plan to do in the end is take all the data that we collect, and then maybe use that to figure out, okay, where can we maybe site some additional permanent monitoring stations in order to help, ensure the public that the air quality remains good. And I think this last slide again is just a further zoom in on where those portable sensors are currently located within Loudoun County. And actually, you can go on our website, and these sensors are providing real-time data. So you can actually go and see, for the Sterling, I guess that's Sterling Middle School, the Sterling Middle School sensor, what was the data an hour ago, or and compare that to what the data was a week ago. So this data is all available to the public online. I think I'm getting to the end finally, so I thank you for your patience. The last thing I wanted to talk is, again, I think maybe Mike referred to this earlier. We have a data center genset database project that we're ongoing with. And so the idea there is we're going to have to get a comprehensive database of all the data centers and all the gensets of those data centers, as well as any prime power units. And we're going to get those available to the public. And then we're going to provide an online portal for the data center operators to come in and report their actual operations of both their backup and primary generation units. And then the system will then calculate emissions from those operations and make all of that data available to the public. And then finally, the last item here is the tool, or this database system, will also allow the public, who are interested anyway, to basically design their own scenarios. If 10 data centers in this location operated for 1,000 hours each, what would the emission impact be? The system will allow the public to calculate those numbers and use different scenarios like that. And then this is just some acronyms in case you're looking at this later and you couldn't figure something out. And then now our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fager. That was incredibly comprehensive. I mean that as a compliment. I also just want to sort of time check with the board. We've got questions here and then 2 more presentations, one from Mr. Ballou and one from Mr. Rack, and then the public forum. I'm happy to keep churning through and get it all done before lunch, but didn't know if folks wanted to take a, a 5-minute restroom break or anything like that, or if so, just, let me know. Otherwise, we'll keep pressing forward. Any questions for Mr. Paggard? Yeah, Mr. Carter.
Yeah, first of all, as well, thank you for a really excellent presentation. I'm curious what the rationale is for, at least what I understand, on the air quality monitoring project. You mentioned that after 3-4 months, and I know these additional monitoring stations have been in place for a bit of time, the plan was to move them from Loudoun to one of the other counties. That strikes me as a relatively short period of time to keep them in place, given that I would assume what you're really looking at is not just normal operations, but when the backup generators kick in from emergency situations and power outages, that's when you're going to get your peak pollutants for the cumulative analysis. Why not maintain the kind of project there, or the additional monitors, for a longer period of time?
Up to you.
My understanding, right, is I think we only have the portable sensors for a certain period of time. And so we want to get that evaluation of Loudoun for, obviously, I think in general, the longer the better, but we want to be able to get some data from Prince William as well before we kind of lose those. And like I say, then I think what we're really planning to do is take the data that we collect and figure out, okay, because the General Assembly did give us some money for additional monitoring. I think so we're going to use that kind of preliminary data to figure out where we're going to spend that money to
Clarify. This is done under an EPA grant, so we're following the grant limitations, and the idea is to decide roughly where would it be good to locate additional sensors permanently in those areas with all the data centers. So that's what this project is doing. We don't have money from EPA to do permanent stations, but we are proposing, it has not happened yet, in the General Assembly we have money for budgeting. We have to write a report, go to the Secretary of Natural Resources, Secretary of Finance, Department of Planning and Budget, the governor's staff to get approval to actually spend some of that money. But the concept is we'll add permanent stations in locations that this study suggests are appropriate. And the big issue has been the airshed is relatively homogeneous. So some scientists have disagreed as to whether or not we need more stations or where they should be. So the idea is to make a scientific determination, what's an appropriate location? And then we have to find the real estate, that's another issue.
Nobody, did you have more on that? No.
Yeah, just a follow-up to Mr. Garbo's question. Is it possible, since obviously there are funds that are, funds are precious and budgets are tight, that monitoring, additional monitoring can be required as part of the permit process? And obviously you would need to design it so that it was appropriate, but I'm just curious what latitude you have in the permit arena for that.
We do have that latitude, and I think we are planning, that is another thing that, again, under Director Roband's leadership, we are starting to do with, I think in particular, the 3 controversial permits that Angie was describing earlier. I think our current plan is any new data center that's a major source, we're going to require them to do some on-site ambient monitoring that they pay for, as well as any data center that uses behind-the-meter generation. And so we're going to require either one of those types of new data centers to start doing ambient monitoring as a condition of getting their permit approvals.
And just a follow-up to that, some of these that are coming in as, I guess, is it Title VI, synthetic miners, is it possible to include some monitoring as part of those permits as well, given how many gen sets seem to be associated with given facilities? Would that make sense?
I mean, certainly, right, possible, yeah. I mean, I think we're, as of now, not contemplating doing that. I think some of it is, I mean, and if I go back, to this one, so like, you know, some of these data centers are literally right next to each other, right? And so if we have 5 data centers on block, each one has a monitor or 2 monitors, you've got 10 monitors, maybe, or 5, and they're all monitoring the same air, right? And so I think that becomes a consideration is, you know, are you requiring the expenditure of resources that isn't really getting you any more, any additional distinct data? So that's one thing, you know, we're taking into consideration. But I think, again, on a case-by-case basis for the synthetic miners, I think that's certainly something we could consider for a particular permit, especially where one that's, you know, has gotten public comment, for example.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. Sorry, you.
Go ahead.
Going back to the beginning of your presentation, talking about regulatory responsibilities, and then sort of looking at this map, which is in Northern Virginia. Is there any cohesiveness between localities in the department, or any delegation and responsibilities? I noticed the noise regulation is soon to be stripped from the localities. Outside of that, do the localities have any authority or say in any of that regulatory?
Well, I would hesitate to say strict, just because I'm not sure that whatever we do as a state for noise regulation will completely remove their ability. Right.
Okay. So I just wondered how they work hand in hand, if that is the case, if they will work hand in hand, or...
We require, in order for us to consider a data center or any application, not just a data center, to be complete for a new stationary source, that applicant has to show us or provide us evidence that the locality has said that proposed source will be in compliance with all the local zoning ordinances. And so that piece of information comes in with the application. And then kind of similar to that, but not really the same. There's a requirement in state law and their regs called site suitability. The locality must also show us evidence that the proposed activity is suitable for that site that the applicant is proposing, right? So both of those pieces of information we have to get from the locality before we consider any air permit application to be complete.
Oh, I see.
Sure.
Can you go back to slide 28, which was the ozone NAC slide?
This one?
Yes. It just looking at Nova, it looks like it's starting to trend back up towards the new 70 parts per billion standard. And I'm just curious, do we have any forecast on whether, as you know, the data center build out in Nova, whether we're at risk of going back into non-attainment? And if so, you know, how we would sort of handle that?
I don't know whether that was or was not going to be addressed.
Mr. Ballou might have that one.
Yeah, Tom Ballou, Air Quality Planning Manager. What you're seeing there in those trends, kind of the dip and then going back up for all of the areas, is that two things happen. Remember, the standards are the design value is a 3-year average. So we had two things go on between 2020 and now. One was COVID year 2020 came off of those design values. The second thing is in 2023 we had significant influence from Canadian fires that have also made those numbers go up. So they're being influenced by air quality events, but not by data centers.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. What are the rules for facilities having to install continuous stat gas monitoring?
continuous emission monitoring
Yes.
systems, or what we call SIMS.
Yeah.
So, in terms of backup gensets at a data center, we have not typically required those, just the theory being they don't operate enough on an individual basis, again, to justify having a SIMS device there. With the stack testing that we do and that we have done now for numerous data centers, I mean, we've literally required them now at this point to have tested hundreds of their engines. And the fact that the engine manufacturers for these devices have been able to get us over time, I think, more accurate and comprehensive data. We didn't feel like the requirement for SIMS made sense for most of these data center backup generation units anyway.
For the behind the meter generators, you have a couple of cases where we have pretty large generation going in behind the meter. Will they have continuous emission monitoring?
We.
At a point one facility, for example?
I don't know that we've made that determination yet. I mean, it's certainly something that could be considered. I think.
So it's a matter of judgment as far as whether you think it's going to be useful in enforcement.
Right. And I think like the point one in Charles City County, where there are, I think it was 35 turbines. I think that's something that might be more reasonable, whereas say the point one that we now have for Remington and Northern Virginia, I think they're looking at hundreds of fuel cells. And so, again, you just talk numerically a much different story there. But yeah, it's definitely something we could consider.
And so they're going to be using fuel cells as their primary energy source?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Sure.
That was really helpful. Thank you very much,
Yep,
Mr. Paggard.
you're welcome.
All right. We'll proceed to the next agenda item, if there are no further questions. The next agenda item is from Mr. Ballou. An update on the climate pollution reduction grant and the comprehensive climate action plan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Tom Ballou, and I'm the Air Quality Planning Manager here at DEQ. I'm going to walk you through Virginia's Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, which DEQ submitted to EPA on June 1 of 2026. This plan represents the first comprehensive statewide greenhouse gas roadmap and reduction plan that the Commonwealth has ever developed by any agency under under administration. Excuse me. All right. That did not work. Why is this not working? Okay, sorry. Get my bearings straight. Before diving into the plan itself, I want to briefly describe the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG. The CPA grant supports climate planning and implementation across the country. Virginia received $3 million for a planning grant in 2023, which enabled us to create both a priority climate action plan first, and then, which was submitted in March of 2024, and now the long-range CCAP plan, which was submitted to EPA in June. Development of the PCAP also positioned DEQ to compete for implementation grant funding, and in 2024, Virginia was awarded approximately $200 million for projects across the Commonwealth. These grants will assist in reducing potent methane emissions and preserve and enhance natural carbon sequestration. And I'll talk more about those grants later on in the presentation. Moving on to the CCAP. The CCAP serves as a 25-year roadmap to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors of the Virginia economy. It outlines where our emissions are coming from, how they may change under future conditions, and what strategies could meaningfully reduce them in ways that support economic growth, reliability, and community resilience. And also, at the same time, meet specific goals in emission reductions. First, I want to talk about kind of the development of the plan and the process. Developing the CCAP required extensive engagement across the Commonwealth. This involved an expert stakeholder group, general public meetings, focused community outreach, state agencies, localities, and regional planning organizations, schools, colleges, and universities. Pretty much the entire bucket of people providing input into the development of this plan. This broad engagement helped ensure the plan reflects diverse interests and needs of all Virginians. DEQ was not alone in this effort. Our planning coordinated closely with large metropolitan statistical areas such as Plan RVA, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Each of these regions received EPA grants as well and developed their own climate action plans under this program. And aligning these with the state level analysis was essential for consistency and accuracy. And as a shout out to my small but mighty CPRG team, we place special emphasis on a focused communities outreach, areas that experience historic environmental burdens, economic challenges. 9 community tabling events were held throughout the state, supported by a multilingual survey approach. These conversations provided critical feedback and shaped the priorities. Ensured considerations were included in the CCAP. Through all these efforts, we believe we reached about a little over 1,000 people, which from an outreach standpoint is pretty extraordinary. And again, I shout out to all my folks, which I'll try to identify at the end of this presentation. Oops, sorry about that. That went a little too far. All right, so what's in this CCAP, Comprehensive Climate Action Plan? Briefly, what I'm going to do here is summarize what is included in this plan. Most of these were required by EPA under the grant. It includes a statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, detailed emissions projections. It identifies established reduction goals, quantifies potential GHG reduction measures across all sectors, and evaluates benefits including criteria pollutant reductions. Workforce implications are analyzed, and the plan identifies potential authority needs, along with opportunities to leverage other funding to implement the plan. These components together form a comprehensive foundation for future climate-related decisions. Here you see Virginia's 2021 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Transportation has become Virginia's largest emission sector at 34%, followed by electric power sector and the industrial sector. Forestry and land use provide substantial emission sink or sequestration of more than about 36% of the gross emissions, bringing our net emissions in 2021 to 93 million metric tons of CO2e. This inventory is the basis for all CCAP emissions accounting and modeling that went into the plan. Next, we had to develop what we call a business as usual projections to understand how emissions may evolve under current state and federal programs. These include the VCEA, or Virginia Clean Economy Act, RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, federal EPA rules, IRA tax credits, and upcoming vehicle standards. The one non-regulatory aspect that we had to consider as well is future demand growth, including that coming from data centers. And lost track of myself here again. Historic trends show a significant reduction in power sector of about 41% since 2005. And also in the industrial sector, about 30% since the same time, 2005. Transportation has consistently remained the highest emitting sector throughout that period. So what did we come up with? A lot of different BAUs and future alternatives. The end result is that 24 alternative model scenarios were developed that span a wide range of future emission predictions. DEQ, along with expert stakeholder groups, selected 2 of these representative cases for deeper analysis. That's shown in the chart at the lower part of the slide.
Tom?
Yes.
I think that's on slide 2.
Oops. Keeps on doing that for me. Why is it doing that? Excuse me. Sorry about that. The first one was scenario 21 assumes none of the federal programs would be able to assist us in reducing emissions. That's because many of those programs have been or are being rescinded by the EPA at this time. The second scenario, which was this, produced basically an increase in emissions of about 4%. And I'm looking. The second scenario that we selected was 21, which had all those federal programs in them and would reduce emissions 15.5% from current emissions. The other thing we had to consider was established goals. These are the goals listed that are currently in place. Virginia has several important statutes and policies guiding climate action. Virginia Clean Economy Act requires 100% clean electricity generation by 2045 from Phase 2 utilities and 2050 by Phase 2 utilities. The Virginia Energy Policy Goal targets net zero carbon emissions across the economy by 2045. DEQ has its own policy statement to reinforce the responsibility to reduce climate pollution and promote resilience. And participation in RGGI has provided a market-based framework to cap and reduce emissions from the power sector. These two, both the VCEA and RGGI, kind of work together to meet that goal of net zero power sector emissions by 2045, 2050. The CCAP then evaluated 15 reduction measures across every sector of emissions. 2 reduction scenarios were analyzed. One was a moderate scenario, and one meets the net zero by 2045. The final plan includes only the net zero pathway, which was a deliberate policy decision and statement. DEQ also evaluated associated costs, benefits, and workforce impacts. Again, the plan was submitted to EPA June 1. The next 2 slides basically go through these 15 different high-level measures across transportation, energy, industry, buildings, waste, agriculture, land use, and multi-sector opportunities. The CCAP identifies strategies that could significantly reduce emissions. These include vehicle electrification, expanded renewable energy, improving industrial efficiency, addressing electricity and demand and load growth, reducing methane emissions from waste and fossil operations, and expanding climate-smart agricultural practices and natural land conservation. And again, that's just the second slide of the high-level measures and sub-measures for each category. So now we get to the results of the plan. This graph is basically showing you the scenario to net zero that was put together and analyzed to 2045, 2050. The net zero emissions pathway illustrates how combined measures can drive long-term reductions to meet 2045 net zero target. This analysis shows which sectors must accelerate emission reductions and how strategies can complement one another over time. A couple of things I'll point out with this slide. The first one is that although all these sectors have to contribute emission reductions to get to this net zero, the net zero goal, I would particularly point out one, the power sector, which is, you can probably see, is the yellow section here. Basically, the power sector zeroes out in 2045 because of the requirements of the VCA. The second one is the blue portion of the bars, which is transportation. And obviously, since it's our largest sector of emissions, it also has to be reduced significantly to get to that net zero goal. And most of that would come through electrification or change in fuel and lower carbon fuels. Also, as you can see, natural sequestration is still playing a role here in that there's some emissions that will be hard to reduce to zero by 2045, so they are being offset by Virginia's natural ability to capture and maintain carbon. This is just another way of looking at the same thing. The figure shows the relative contribution of each reduction measure towards the total GHG emission reductions. Transportation, clean energy generation, and land conservation strategies play especially large roles, while industrial and waste sector strategies also support that reduction. The main takeaway of this slide is there's a lot of things on this side here that have to go into reducing those emissions. They're not even that's not even the entire list, but it will take a lot of individual measures to collectively get to that net zero goal. Very quickly, just wanted to talk briefly about the implementation grants. Turning back to implementation, DEQ submitted 3 CPRG applications in April 24 for transportation decarbonization, methane reduction, and natural and working lands projects. EPA received roughly 300 applications nationwide, and Virginia was one of the only 3 states that were awarded more than one of these grants, coming up to about $200 million in total. First one I'll talk about is the methane reduction grant. Virginia received $100 million for priority methane reduction. This included coal mine methane capture and utilization, landfill methane reduction, and food rescue and composting. These projects are expected to reduce about 25 million metric tons of CO2e by 2050. All of these projects are various stages of implementation. The food rescue and composting, there's been about 20 individual grants given to universities in Virginia to implement that program. The coal mine methane project or projects is currently being, the application has been submitted and we're currently evaluating and going through the selection process for those projects, and the same thing goes for landfills. We have applications in-house that we're currently evaluating. Make sure whether it's okay. The other grant that we got is Virginia is part of the Atlantic Conservation Coalition with North Carolina, South Carolina, and Maryland. Roughly $100 million will be used to support conservation and restoration projects across wetlands, forests, and coastal habitats in Virginia. 10 projects will be implemented by DWR, VPA, and tribal partners, with an additional set of regional projects in Virginia being selected and led by the Nature Conservancy. These efforts will significantly support long-term natural climate solutions. And last but not least, again, we have been a lot of discussions with data centers. Again, as I mentioned during the BAU, we had to consider specifically the projected demand in electricity growth and work that into our, that's why we came up with a very wide selection of BAU scenarios. Basically, we used 2 different estimates for data centers. The first one was the high, what we call a high scenario, which is straight out of the PJM projections for 2025, PJM interconnection projections. The second one was a lower or more moderate growth based on just established service contracts with data centers. So it was based on what was currently in hand that we knew that were going to be provided electricity. So both of them were worked into our the BAU scenario, and that, as you can see, they do create significantly different emissions pathways that have to be dealt with, again, to get to that net zero goal. So I want to thank you for this presentation. Thank you for listening today. And one thing I will mention is in your handouts on this question page, there's a link to our CPARG webpage that has both the CCAP, the full CCAP, and all the appendices that you can look at and download. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blue. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, thank you. Just two questions, one for clarification. You mentioned in an earlier slide that there were 2 BAU kind of scenarios, the with federal programs, without. It was not clear to me when you kind of showed the charts, I guess, that are on slides 15 and 16, which scenario that was kind of based on.
So again, it's in the lower graph here, and I'll use my, this first gray line here was a scenario that did not have any of those federal measures in it. So it means there's no there's no vehicle GHG standards, there's no 111D, 111B standards, and what's the other one I'm missing? The other measure, which I'm forgetting what it is now, but the yellow and lower line is basically having all those strategies still be in place. We used both of them when we went forward and did the mitigation analyses, and we still had to get to the same place in terms of the net zero, meeting the net zero goals. So it was just, this without the federal strategies just made it more difficult for us to get there because we had to come up with other strategies to be able to still meet that net zero goal. That answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to clarify, so on, again, slide 15, when you talked about the needed reduction in transportation emissions to get to the net zero goal between 2045 and 2050, does that contemplate motor vehicle standards going forward or no federal programs?
In terms of the specific net zero slide, it does not anticipate those federal reductions. So it's meant that more reductions in terms of electrification would be needed to meet that goal.
Okay. And I guess the next question, which you most likely don't know the answer to, is what sort of response either have you all gotten or might you expect to get from EPA given our?
Well, that's an interesting question. Really, since we've had since there's been a change in federal administration and EPA's policy, they basically have said you need to meet your requirements and submit the plan. They're not going to give us any comments on it. They're not going to post them. They're not going to do anything. We just had to meet. We had to submit something, a plan to EPA to meet the conditions of the grant. So really, it's been up to the states to post their own plans and make them available and publicize them in any way, any way we saw fit.
I'm also particularly interested in the relationship between, and help me connect the dots because a lot of this could be my own ignorance, but the rescission of the greenhouse gas emission endangerment finding and the effect that has on, I guess, on the state level. Help me connect how those things work in terms of, and then I guess specifically the EV infrastructure for transportation, if greenhouse gas emissions is federally not considered a pollutant.
First part of that question is that the endangerment finding the EPA is rescinding is specifically meant to allow them to repeal their greenhouse gas emission standards for motor vehicles. So that's the kind of the cause and effect is that you remove the endangerment finding. That was the basis for promulgating those vehicle standards to begin with. So that was a mechanism to rescind that particular program. As far as EV infrastructure, EPA's standards those emission standards didn't specifically get at infrastructure. It's basically what comes before first. If you have all these electric vehicles that are coming out of EPA's programs, you're going to have to establish an adequate EV charging infrastructure to be able to meet that increased demand from those. Because the EPA standard, even though it didn't specifically say it, really did push the market, was going to push the market towards electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. So you've got to have the infrastructure to be able to support, much larger percentages of vehicles being EVs.
Just ask a quick follow-up. When you say all federal programs, do you mean regulatory programs? Do you mean tax structure? And when did you set that baseline in the process?
It really was specific to just the three measures that are listed in this particular slide.
So my follow-up question then is for the IRA tax credits, where are you assuming today's federal programs or before last summer's tax bill passed?
Today's.
Okay.
I will just add that we had assistance from a contractor to do this work, and when we did right at the time when the administrations were changing, we had to make a change to our BEU analyses based on what the new lay of the land looked like in terms of IRA
Part of why I
incentives.
asked is I was part of this working group, and we had a whole discussion about
Yep.
when we would set the baseline, but I
Yep.
never got the outcome for it.
And
so-
we got around to making those changes as best we could tell.
Okay, thank you.
And this was all done in a finite period of time, so like I said, we had to use PGM projections that were available at the time. We had to use the 2021 inventory because at the moment, that's all we had. And inventories are a different subject, where they take quite a long time to, there's always a big lag time between inventory year and current year.
Got it. But just to be clear,
Yep.
when you say federal programs, you only mean those three categories?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I have just a question about on the 2021 inventory. This is on slide 8.
Yep.
The forestry and land use sinks. It's a pretty significant amount of GHG emissions that you're backing out there, 52 million metric tons. And I'm just curious how, like, is that just trying to account for business as usual? In other words, without regard to policy, this is how much we think forests in Virginia, farms in Virginia are absorbing. So it's not sort of in the way of an offset where you're trying to account for additionality. or anything like that.
It's strictly an estimate of what was the sequestration amount being done during that particular year. We did have to project it forward, and we actually, in our BAU projections, we actually showed some decrease in that amount because of loss of sequestration lands.
Loss of forest cover or
Yep.
whatever.
And then another thing, one of the measures that went in there was to try to reduce that loss of natural lands.
Yeah, you have on your net zero emissions reduction analysis slide.
Yep.
Just a couple of things. First of all, I mean, it does seem a little optimistic. And I'm just wondering, what were the constraints you placed on feasibility? For example, think about just the RPS we're operating under. There's a trigger for deficiency payments rather than reductions. And the prices for renewable energy credits are already approaching
Right.
the level that will trigger deficiency payments. And so there's just one example. And then of course with vehicle emissions, given the current rate of penetration of electric vehicles, and the last time I looked on VDOT's website, we have exactly one NEVI charging station in operation. Whether that's current or not, I don't know, but it's obviously a very slow process. And I'm just sort of wondering, is this a hopeful analysis, or what's your sense of how realistic
Yeah.
this picture?
This whole analysis, and we've said it all from the beginning, was aspirational. And that it was really meant to say, what would it take to get there? For instance, one of the decisions we had to make was with VCEA. Is it all or nothing? That's all we could really do because we couldn't pick a middle ground because there was no basis to do so. So in this analysis anyways, we have strict 100% compliance with the VCEA.
Well, I mean, there is provision in the VCEA for keeping power plants operating
Yep.
in order to keep the lights on. So
Understood.
the law does provide
Right.
some flexibility, but so the point you're making though is you held to the standard of shutting down fossil power plants by 2050 period.
Yep.
Okay.
That is
And
correct.
the model you had to back solve to.
And,
how to do it.
and Ms. Dominich probably can vouch to this, we had a long discussion about that whole process and what we would assume there as well.
Yeah.
Any other further questions from the board? No? Mr. Show, sorry.
Well, just one more question about that graph. You have imports going to zero, essentially. Is that because of the RPS, or why, since imports aren't our own emissions, why would imports be going to zero in 2050?
That was, again, another kind of modeling decision, if you will, for us to be able to show that we would have to do that. We'd have to do something with both imported power and in-state power. It's not a perfect solution, but that's how we decided to some degree, that's how we got to the math to be able to demonstrate that net zero, attainment of that net zero goal.
And there's no industrial carbon dioxide removal in here?
What happened in the industrial side were two things that were factored into the emission reductions in that sector. One was energy efficiency types of projects, and the other one was a shift to some degree to hydrogen or lower carbon fuels.
Actually, my question was about carbon dioxide removal. You didn't have this
Oh,
technology.
carbon capture is what we're talking about. Yeah, I'm looking now. We did not include any carbon
I don't see any
capture.
substantial wedge
No.
here of carbon capture.
No, it was considered, but assumed that the other means would be a better path, if you would.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Just for your reference.
Thank you, Scott.
Ah, yes, staff, please stand up. From left to right, Ollie Walker, Mackay, why am I forgetting? Davis, excuse me. It's one of those mornings. Ava Levine and Angela Conroy. We had one other, Allison France, but she moved to another position right before this, right before we finalized the plan. So these folks deserve a great deal of credit for putting all this together, along with our contractor, ICF.
Thank you all very much for your contributions. All right, just a time check. We're at noon, and we've got Mr. Rack's presentation on Reggie, and then public comment.
Just push through.
All right, let's push through.
Get us out of here.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name's Jonathan Rock. I'm the Deputy Director at DEQ, and I am the last leg of the marathon relay. And I'll try to get through as quickly as I can. I think everybody's ready to get to the finish line. Today we're going to walk through Virginia's renewed participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI as we call it. Let me see if I can find the right button here. Okay, great. Thank you. So here's what we'll cover this afternoon. We'll start with a quick introduction to RGGI and how the program works. Then we'll move into the 2026 legislation by the General Assembly and the first regulatory action that DEQ has already completed. We'll review the recent RGGI program review and model rule updates, talk about the second regulatory action that's required by the end of this year, and then briefly review how auction proceeds will be distributed. RGGI is a cooperative effort among participating states to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector. Each state develops its own cap and invest program, but the programs are aligned closely enough to allow for fungibility of the allowances, regional auctions, and coordinated program operations. With Virginia, there are now currently 11 states participating in RGGI. At its core, RGGI is a regional cap and invest program. There is a declining cap on CO2 emissions from power plants. Allowances are sold through market-based auctions, and power plants must hold one allowance for every ton of carbon dioxide that they emit. RGGI states have discretion as to how they invest the proceeds. Virginia has chosen to invest in energy conservation, flood preparedness, and planning for climate change. And going forward, starting this year, 45% of the proceeds from the auctions will go toward customer credits, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. The Virginia Carbon Trading Rule covers fossil fuel-fired units serving generators of 25 megawatts electric or greater, and that's currently about 90 units at 25 facilities in Virginia. And I stress the word units because there is not, under our regulation, an aggregation of the generating units at a particular power station, so we look at the individual rating of those units to determine whether they require allowances. Also, in response to one of the earlier questions, my recollection from the regulation is that there was a provision in the original reg for behind-the-meter generation being exempt, but that has sunset, right, Dom? So there no longer is any differentiation between behind-the-meter and front-of-the-meter generating units. If they qualify in terms of the capacity, the size of the generating units, then they're subject to the RGGI allowances. As you, I'm sure, know, the state emissions budget declines over time, and allowances are sold at quarterly auctions. The sources can bank or trade allowances, and compliance is normally based on a 3-year control period, although for 2026, because we weren't participating, it's only a 6-month control period. This chart shows Virginia's original emissions budgets through 2030. You'll notice that the program was inactive in 2024, 2025, and the first half of this year, so those budgets did not apply. Virginia's participation resumed on July 1 for the second half of this year. And starting in 2027, January 1, future budgets shown here will be revised to align with the latest RGGI program review and model rule. This second chart shows the actual historical Virginia power sector CO2 emissions from 2015 through 2025. You can see the downward trend during 21 to 23 when the program was active, followed by rebounding increases in 2024 and 2025. Virginia participated in RGGI from 2021 through 2023, as I mentioned. The program was inactive from 2024 until the end of this last June under Executive Order 9 of the Youngkin administration. In this last General Assembly session, the General Assembly directed DEQ to rejoin RGGI expeditiously through 2 regulatory actions. There also was a lawsuit challenging the repeal of the rule that was ultimately successful, which further supported our resumption and participation in RGGI. 2 legislative actions were adopted by the 26th General Assembly. The first one, HB 397 and Senate Bill 802, strengthened the existing statutory requirement for Virginia to participate in RGGI, as you can see, replacing words of authorization to words of shall or requirement to participate. Secondly, in HB 29, which we refer to as the caboose budget bill, the General Assembly directed DEQ to take all regulatory actions necessary to rejoin RGGI by May 21st of this year. It also required DEQ to repeal the prior repeal regulation and reinstate the 2020 carbon trading rule with any amendments that are needed to account for the period when the rule was not in effect. So the first regulatory action was published on May 18th of this year in the Virginia Register, and it does a couple of things. It formally states that Virginia's program was inactive from January 1 of 24 through June 30th of 26, with no compliance obligation for the sources during that period. It creates a one-time 6-month control period from July through December of this year. It adjusts the 2026 allowance budget to reflect that we're only participating for 6 months. So we basically divided in half the annual allowance budget for this year. And it includes a what we call a crosswalk, or a section that connects the different regulatory references between the existing permits and the reinstated regulation. This action was exempt per the General Assembly budget language from the APA and did not require approval of the Air Board. Before we discuss the second regulatory action that's needed to address this legislation, I'm going to briefly describe the latest RGGI program review from 2025 that impacts the pending regulatory action. So in 2025, the RGGI states got together and did their periodic program review. They updated the proposed budgets for allowance reductions and made some amendments to the model rule. And some of the details are that the program is now extended through 2037. Beginning in 2027, the regional cap declines fairly steeply through 2033, then flattens through 2037. And I'll show you a graph that depicts that. There will be 2 cost containment reserves starting in 2027, and those are additional allowances over and above the budgets that will be released if the auction prices reach a certain level. And those trigger prices escalate annually per the model rule. The emissions containment reserve is being replaced with a minimum reserve price, which ensures that allowances cannot be sold below a certain threshold. Based on recent price trajectories, that doesn't seem likely, but it still is in there. Offsets are being removed from the program going forward, although previously issued offset allowances can still be used under the existing limits. So this is a graphic summary of the model rule program review components, showing the current RGGI policy, that's the lighter blue line, the policy update, and then the 2 levels of cost containment reserves that get added into the available allowances. The second regulatory action, which is to incorporate these updates, must be completed by January 1st of 2027 to align with the new RGGI model rule and program review. This action will update and extend Virginia's budgets through 2037, add the second cost containment reserve, remove the emissions containment reserve. And like the first action that I described, this, per the General Assembly's budget language, is exempt from APA and from Air Board action. So this is a graph that shows what we believe will be contained in the regulation when it finally gets published, showing the annual emissions budgets that would be necessary to align with the RGGI program review and model rule. I will point out that these numbers do not include either of the cost containment reserves, because those are contingent based upon the pricing of the auctions. So this is the sort of base budgets going forward without the cost containment reserves, and you can see it flattens out in 2037 and maintains a steady level beyond that. So key dates in Virginia's participation. Obviously, we've already resumed participation back on July 1st. The first auction from which Virginia will receive proceeds is scheduled for September 9th. We'll have a second auction on December 2nd. And then for this shortened 6-month control period, the allowances have to be surrendered, needed to cover the 6-month control period, and that date is March of next year, 2027. The enabling legislation authorized DEQ to establish and manage an auction program consistent with RGGI, and it also specifies how the auction revenue that Virginia receives is to be distributed. So under the prior program, 45% of the proceeds was for flood preparedness and coastal resilience, 50% for low-income energy efficiency programs, 3% for DEQ administrative and climate planning activities, and 2% for DHCD administrative costs. But going forward, based upon the language in the most recent budget, 45% of the proceeds will be set aside at the beginning, and those will be dispersed to the various electric utilities, including some of the co-ops, for the reduction of customer bills for residential customers, I think churches and synagogues, houses of worship, and certain small businesses. And so that's specified in the budget language. We are currently working with the State Corporation Commission for them to provide direction as to who receives how much of that 45% of proceeds go to the different utilities, and then rules for those utilities for the disbursement of the credits onto customer bills. And then my final slide is just the DEQ webpage, where you can find further resources on the carbon trading rule and RGGI. And with that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Questions about RGGI? Mr. Sheriff.
So do you had, thanks a lot for this, by the way. One question, it used to be the case that behind the meter plants that didn't sell more than, say, 15%, I think was the rule, weren't covered, units weren't covered. Is that not the case anymore?
There was a provision, but it has sunset. I think it's sunset in 2021.
2021.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that no longer applies.
So a unit over 25 megawatts doesn't have to sell to the grid to be covered?
Correct.
All right, my next question is, has to do, if we go back to the emission trends graph, which is slide
Sure.
7 on your, sort of a couple of questions embedded.
Is this the slide?
Next, no, the one emissions, not the
Emissions
budget.
trends,
That's it.
there we go.
So first of all, you showed what our prospective budget might be, but you didn't say what our likely CCR amounts were going to be. Is it going to be something like 2 million tons?
Tom was just telling me that. I think it's
For each CCR?
For this year or?
No, for next year.
for next year, yeah.
Next year is, each one will be 3.4 million allowances.
Okay, so, I'm just trying to do some quick mental arithmetic. That means we have to come down by about 5 million tons to stay within, if we were to stay within our budget. Okay, all right. So it's the CCR, each of those, I mean, given the current price, chances are both of the
Both will be
CCRs will
exercised.
be released, so we'll
Yep.
end up with 6 million tons.
In the last 2 years, all CCRs have been bought up in the first
Yeah,
auction.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thanks.
Just had one question. Obviously, because of the amendment and the caboose bill, we didn't have any action that we had to do. Do you have a time frame for when, or we might, like, just looking ahead, when there might be an issue updating the regulation that would have to come before this board?
So the current regulatory action, obviously we have to have it done before the end of the year. Our goal is to try to get it published in the Virginia Register in October-ish timeframe. There's nothing on our regulatory plan, I'll look at Brandon here, that would involve further amendments to the carbon trading rule. but that doesn't preclude the possibility of that going forward.
So I've got another one pop up. We're just chatting about this. We have all these facilities that, if you add up their generators, they're a lot more than 25 megawatts. And we're applying a per turbine rule. What authority would it take, aside from agreement with Reggie? I assume we'd have to work it out with Reggie. What authority would it take for us to bubble, say, these data centers with 250 units or behind the meter generation? What would it take for us to actually include those in Reggie?
It would certainly require an amendment to the carbon trading rule, the regulation.
Yep.
I don't think that it would require any statutory action to make that change, but we'd have to analyze that to be certain.
Thanks.
All right, if there are no further questions, thank you, Mr. Ack, for the update on Reggie. The next item up on our agenda is the public forum. Do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do. We have 2 individuals signed up to speak this morning, or afternoon, I should say now. The first is Julie Bolthouse with Piedmont Environmental Council.
All right, Ms. Bolthouse, you are welcome to, you want to take it from the podium? And I'll just sort of, the rules on public comment, speaking on items not on today's agenda, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Julie Bolthouse from Piedmont Environmental Council. I just want to point out that the Department of Energy, FERC, and PJM, our regional transmission operator, are looking at ways to connect data centers to the grid despite capacity constraints. Connect and manage is one way that is being discussed. They would connect data centers to the grid, leveraging excess capacity during non-peak energy usage days. And on peak energy usage days, they would be curtailed. Curtailment means running off of backup generators because most data centers cannot actually go offline or flex their load to another location or have long-duration battery storage. A connect and manage approach means running off of generators, one of the most heavily polluting sources of power. Many of these sites are next to schools and homes more frequently, and the use of them more frequently and for longer durations would have heavy impacts on public health. And during times of air pollution, this would oftentimes coincide with times of air pollution. I apologize. My notes are from a different comment thing, so they're not necessarily jiving exactly with what I'm trying to say. But the air pollution times when we would be running these generators would very often be with heat wave events when we already have excess air pollution in the background. According to the 2024 JLARC study, data centers are only using on average about 7% of their permitted capacity. So there's a lot of ramp up potential still in the pipeline. Northern Virginia is seeing increased generator usage already during grid pressure events as we've sent to DEQ. And as more load connects to the grid, the cumulative impacts are piling up. This pushes us into using these generators approved as mostly synthetic minor permits, basically as peaker plants. The SCC submitted a letter recently to PJM stating that they plan to work with the Data Center Coalition and industry advocacy group to develop a connect and manage plan, and we ask that the Air Pollution Control Board actively seek to be participants in developing out this plan to ensure that air quality is protected along with grid reliability. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Second speaker is, and I apologize in advance, Saif O'Flynn with Community Climate Collaborative.
Thank you.
All right.
So while I'm not speaking on matters on the agenda, my comments theme is around cumulative impacts, which seems to have come up a lot during the board's questions and discussions after each presentation today. So it's clearly a matter of major concern for a lot of us. During the recent DEQ environmental justice town halls, DEQ staff flagged that their EJ team is working without any definition of cumulative impacts or how to incorporate cumulative impacts in consideration of permit applications in DEQ defined environmental justice communities across Virginia. Both for staff and for the public, there's clearly an urgent need for a definition and enforceable threshold of cumulative impacts for EJ communities, especially given the fact that EJ communities in areas like Fluvanna, Buckingham, Chesterfield and Cumberland are all under active threat of multiple gas plants impacting their air quality. An overlay map of active polluters as well as pending permit applications should be included in the DEQ's EJ map to help the public understand the existing and potential air quality impacts of the huge gas plant build-out being pursued in EJ communities across Virginia.
Thank you very much. No further?
No one else is registered to speak.
No one else is registered? Wonderful. Well, I want to thank Ms. Domenech and Ms. Beamer for allowing us to join you on the board here. Welcome us in. And with nothing else before the board, I believe we are adjourned.
Yeah.